Good morning everyone. I'm out in the back country of New South Wales, Australia. The town of Inverell is about 60k that way. Narrabri is about another 50k that way. And I'm standing out front of the old Myall Creek homestead. And many Australians would know the word Myall and understand its significance. And I'm going to make a short video. It's not going to be a happy video. It's quite a horrible story of something that happened back in 1838. I'll take you to the site where the incident occurred and we'll have a little talk down there. There's a short path leading to the memorial of this site, and along the path there's little signs depicting the history of the native people who used to live in this area, the Gomeroi people, and in particular the Wirrai tribe that lived in this area. So just a little backstory to what occurred here on the 10th of June 1838. The Wirrai people had lived in this area for centuries, hunting and gathering their food and living in peace. And in the 1830s, white settlers came to this area and they wanted the best pastoral land for their sheep and for their cattle. So any natives that were living in this area were forced off the land. All the best areas were taken by the squatters, the rich white people. And around 1837, they started some very harsh, punitive expeditions where white men would gather and hunt down any natives that they could find and brutally kill them so that their sheep had good grazing land. In late May 1838, a group of about 32 Wirrai people travelled from this area, around the Myall Creek area, northward up towards Inverell, and they stayed at a station there for a while. But word came down that a group of white men were travelling about the area, just massacring the native people in a brutal fashion. Hundreds were killed, and the Wirrai people were advised that it's going to be too dangerous for them to stay there. And one of the stockmen from Myall Creek suggested to them to come to Myall Creek. So that's what they did. In early June, the young men of the tribe went down to Newton's station, which is up north, to cut some bark. Around 4 p.m. on the 10th of June, the men who were cutting bark up north were informed that a group of men were approaching Myall Creek and that their families were in danger. So they took off into the bush to try and save their families. But they didn't realise that they were too late. Well, that group of men had arrived at Myall Creek at 3 o'clock and had already rounded up the old men, women and children, tied their hands together and led them away into the bush. And just below this monument, in the valley below, the old men, women and children who had been rounded up were brutally massacred. And brutally, I mean, it's just terrible what they did. And I won't go into too great detail about what happened, but the white men had swords and guns and clubs, and you can imagine what happened. And not all of them were killed. One young Aboriginal woman was kept alive, and you can imagine the depredations that she underwent at their hands of these terrible men. It was on the slopes of this hill that the men, the old men, women and children were brutally massacred. The children were beheaded with swords, and the men and old men and women were forced to run the gauntlet of the white men who just hacked them away and killed them and shot them and stabbed them. Oh, it's horrible. But they'd taken them a long way. About 2 or 3 kilometres down that way is the old homestead. And they brought them all the way up here, bound and terrified. And they piled the bodies up and burnt them, hoping to hide their terrible deeds. But 2 white men, Henry Hobbs and Alexander, who worked on the Myall station, sent word to Sydney about the terrible incident that happened here. An investigation was launched and the men involved were all rounded up. Now, only one of those men, a settler named Fleming, was a free man. The others were convicts or ex-convicts. Now, the 11 convicts were all rounded up, but Fleming was never arrested, tried or anything. The other 11 men went to Sydney, faced trial, and for the first and only time in Australian history, white men were executed for killing black men. And the papers in Sydney were outraged. They declared that white men should never be tried for killing black men. Unbelievable. And there were hundreds and hundreds of similar incidences that were never recorded or never punished. It's just tragic. So this became famous as the Myall Creek Massacre because white men reported it. That's the only reason. Australia is a beautiful place, but it does have a dark history, a history we should never forget.